Sit back, relax, and let your imagination drift not to the familiar landscapes you know today, but to a land 5,000 years in the past, where the hum of life was carried not by machines or cities of steel, but by a river whose waters fed an ancient world. Along the banks of the Indus and its sister rivers, a civilization rose that was both vast and mysterious, powerful yet silent, a society whose echoes still linger in the soil of modern-day Pakistan and India. They called no empire by name, left behind no epic tales etched in stone, and offered no grand proclamations of kings or conquests. Instead, they built with brick, order, and precision, creating cities so advanced that archaeologists still marvel at their planning. Straight roads stretched like veins through the heart of their settlements, lined with neatly arranged homes, wells, and courtyards. Underground drains carried away water with an elegance rivaling modern systems, and great granaries hinted at a people who knew how to sustain thousands. This was not a scattered culture of villages. It was a network of urban centers: Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dolavira, Rakagarik, connected by trade, united by craft, and bound together by a script no one alive today can read. And yet, what is perhaps most haunting is not the sophistication of their world, but its silence. Unlike Mesopotamia, which shouted its stories in cuneiform, or Egypt, which carved its myths deep into stone, the Indus people left no voice we can hear. Their writing is a puzzle of signs and symbols, etched onto seals, pottery, and tablets, each one a whisper from a forgotten tongue. Some believe they recorded trade, others say prayers, or laws, or even poetry, but the truth is lost, hidden behind a barrier no scholar has yet broken. And so we are left with ruins that speak through structure, not through words, cities that reveal ingenuity but withhold identity. Who were their leaders? What gods did they worship? How did they see themselves in the endless flow of time? The Indus Valley Civilization remains a shadow clear in outline, but elusive in meaning. And the greatest mystery of all is this: how could a society so carefully built, so beautifully ordered, simply vanish? That, dear listener, is the question that will guide us tonight. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro rise out of the dust like a labyrinth of memory, each brick holding the quiet weight of lives once lived. Walk through its streets in your mind. The roads wide enough for carts. The homes laid side by side with an almost mathematical symmetry, the cool air drifting from narrow alleyways that seem designed not by chance, but by careful intention. There is no chaos here, no haphazard sprawl. This was a civilization that believed in order, that valued structure, that built their world with precision. The baked bricks, identical in size, whisper of a standardization unknown in many early cultures. Every piece fits together as if guided by a hidden rhythm. But among these patterns of perfection, there is an eerie absence. Where are the palaces, the towering monuments, the shrines to gods and rulers? In Egypt, the pharaohs proclaimed themselves eternal in stone. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose like stairways to the heavens. Yet in the Indus Valley, the builders left behind no such arrogance of power. Instead, their cities speak of a collective, a society where authority, if it existed, hid itself in the background. The so-called Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, massive, watertight pool built with layers of bricks and bitumen hints at ritual, perhaps purification, perhaps ceremony. Around it stood what may have been halls for gathering, spaces where the community shared something greater than themselves. And yet, There are no inscriptions to tell us what those rituals meant, no carvings to name the gods they honored. All we can do is imagine the echo of voices that once filled those chambers, the flicker of oil lamps reflecting on water, the quiet steps of people descending into the pool for reasons we can never fully grasp. Their silence unsettles us. It leaves us staring at empty spaces where answers should be, forcing us to wonder, was this a culture without kings, without rulers claiming divine right? Or did they have leaders who chose anonymity, power veiled behind simplicity? Perhaps their strength lay in unity, a society that lived not for one, but for all. And yet, if that was true, what happened to that unity? What force could dismantle a system so meticulously crafted, leaving behind only bricks, bones, and unanswered questions? As we leave the great bath behind, the silence of Mohenjo-Daro follows us like a shadow, an ancient voice cut short, urging us to listen more closely to what has been left unsaid. Scattered among the ruins of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are tiny artifacts that seem, at first glance, ordinary small square seals carved with animals, symbols, and lines of mysterious script. They are smooth to the touch, made of steatite, hardened by fire, and etched with care. Some bear the image of a bull, others an elephant, or a horned figure seated cross-legged, surrounded by marks that resemble letters. These seals traveled with merchants, pressed into clay to leave their imprint, tokens of identity or trade, but beyond their surface utility, they carry the faint promise of something far greater, a written language, a voice of a people lost to time. And yet, that voice has remained silent. The Indus script, unlike cuneiform or hieroglyphs, has never been deciphered. No bilingual text has been discovered, no Rosetta Stone to bridge the gap. Each symbol stands like a locked door, teasing us with meaning but offering no key. Scholars debate endlessly, was it a full language, capable of recording complex thought, or merely shorthand, signs used for trade and ritual? Some argue it was a proto-writing system, a collection of sacred symbols meant to be seen but not spoken. Others suggest it carried the same richness as Sumerian or Egyptian, encoding myths, laws, or even poetry now forever hidden from human understanding. Imagine, for a moment, what secrets might lie in those lines. Could they reveal the names of rulers who chose not to carve their likeness into stone? Could they describe the rituals held in the great bath, or the prayers spoken to deities whose faces we cannot reconstruct? Could they tell us why the cities fell silent, why an entire civilization vanished into the dust of history? The absence of answers deepens the enigma. Every attempt to decode the script ends in disagreement. Every theory collapses under its own uncertainty. And so, the Indus Valley remains one of the only great civilizations whose written word still mocks us, sealed away in time. As you look at these seals, imagine a message reaching out across millennia, written, waiting, unread. What if the key to their disappearance lies hidden within those characters, still buried, still unread, still whispering beneath the soil? The thought lingers like a shadow. We are surrounded by words, but cannot hear the story they long to tell. When archaeologists first brushed away the dust of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, what they uncovered seemed less like ruins of chance and more like the blueprint of a carefully designed world. The cities were not chaotic clusters of huts thrown together by survival, but grids, mathematical, precise, deliberate. Streets ran straight and intersected at right angles, as though someone had measured, planned, and then enforced order upon the earth itself. Homes, though modest in size, were built from uniform baked bricks, strong and enduring, many with private wells and bathing areas, luxuries rare in the ancient world. Beneath the surface, a hidden system pulsed with genius. Underground drains, covered with stone slabs, carried wastewater away from houses, connecting neighborhoods in an invisible network of cleanliness. Some call it the first sanitation system. In history, a sign that these people valued health, structure, and a quiet kind of dignity. Unlike the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia or the pyramids of Egypt, here there were no monumental tombs or godlike statues demanding worship. Instead, the grandeur was in the details, in the rhythm of everyday life. The Great Bath at Mohenjo, a vast tank lined with bricks, waterproofed with bitumen, suggests ritual, perhaps purification, perhaps something more. Imagine the sound of water echoing softly against brick walls, the reflection of torches flickering across its surface, and the quiet steps of those who descended into its depths, not just to wash, but to cleanse the spirit. Yet the silence of these cities is as loud as their sophistication. No palaces have been found, no thrones, no obvious seat of kings, no evidence of armies or weapons in great numbers, no signs of conquest. A civilization of such scale and organization must have had leaders, yet their presence is invisible, like a shadow behind the curtain. With power here shared, collective, or hidden in rituals we cannot decipher. Did priests rule through sacred rites, or did merchants guide the economy with unseen hands? The very absence of visible rulers unsettles historians, for it defies the pattern of early civilizations built on authority and domination. As we walk these streets today, empty of footsteps, stripped of voices, the silence presses close. It feels deliberate, as if the people themselves chose to vanish without leaving a trace of who they were. And so the question deepens. What kind of society builds cities of such perfection, yet leaves behind no clear story of its makers? What kind of world thrives on order and then falls into silence? Among the greatest mysteries of the Indus Valley lies a script etched into seals, carved into pottery, pressed into tiny fragments of stone and clay. Small symbols, often fewer than a dozen at a time, arranged in ways that suggest meaning, order, intention, and yet, to this day, no one has been able to read them. Imagine holding one of those seals in your hand, smooth, cool to the touch, its surface carved with strange signs, fish-like shapes, tridents, circles, squares, and human-like figures with horns. They are compact, precise, as though they carried secrets of trade, ritual, or law. Some scholars believe they may represent names, family lines, or even prayers. Others suggest they were economic markers used by merchants to track goods across rivers and deserts. But the script has no Rosetta Stone, no translation to unlock its voice. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, the Indus symbols stand alone, an island of silence in the sea of ancient languages. Sit back and consider what that means. An entire civilization speaking to us across 5 millennia, and yet their words remain sealed. We know they had order, we know they had trade, we know they had rituals and art, but without their language, we cannot hear their thoughts. We cannot know their prayers, their laws, their stories, or the names of their gods. The seals themselves often depict animals, unicorn-like creatures, bulls, elephants, crocodiles. Some appear mythical, others natural, yet all carved with a reverence that suggests power and symbolism. Were these animals totems, protectors, gods incarnate? Did the unicorn stand for something sacred, Or was it simply the crest of a family line? The truth is buried beneath interpretation. Imagine the frustration of scholars staring at these marks for decades, each believing they are close, yet never breaking through. Some argue it isn't even a true writing system at all, but merely symbols, pictographs with no spoken language attached. If that is true, then perhaps the Indus people spoke only through objects and ritual, their world bound more to symbol than to sound. But if it is a true script, then we are staring at the unspoken heart of a civilization, forever locked. And so each seal whispers the same haunting riddle. How can a civilization so advanced, so widespread, leave behind its words and yet deny us the key to understanding them? Step with me into the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, where streets once rang with footsteps and voices, but now only the wind moves through the alleys. The bricks are still there, baked and strong, laid with mathematical precision, aligned along a grid that speaks of forethought and vision. Picture yourself walking down a straight avenue, the afternoon sun casting long shadows against walls that once framed homes, workshops, and markets. The air would have smelled of earth and clay, of fires used for cooking, of spices carried in from trade caravans. Now those same streets echo only with silence, a silence heavy enough to feel on your skin. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, these were not just villages. They were sprawling urban centers, each carefully planned, each designed as though the builders foresaw the needs of thousands. There were public wells, carefully constructed baths, raised citadels, and even platforms where scholars believe gatherings or rituals may have taken place. Water flowed through channels, collected in reservoirs, and drained away through covered sewers, an achievement some modern cities struggled to replicate until centuries later. Sit back and imagine the scale. Entire populations sustained by order, sanitation, and architecture. And yet, as you stand there in the present day, with dust rising under your feet, all you see are walls cut off mid-rise, staircases that lead to nothing, and fragments of rooms where families once lived. These cities are frozen in time, as though their inhabitants stepped away for a moment and never returned. Some archaeologists suggest they were abandoned slowly, over generations, as the river shifted and food grew scarce. Others whisper of sudden collapse, perhaps invasion, perhaps disease. The cities do not tell us which story is true. They leave us with stone, with brick, with patterns that still hold logic but conceal the reason behind their fall. Think about it. A civilization advanced enough to design perfect drainage and water systems, yet powerless when the deeper forces of nature or fate turned against them. Their streets still stand, but the lives that filled them have turned to ash and bone, scattered and lost. And so we walk among these ruins as if among ghosts, feeling the weight of a city that still breathes its story into the air, but in a language no one understands. The silence itself becomes the greatest monument. Tell me what is more haunting than a city built for life, now forever held in deathly stillness. Among the most haunting relics of the Indus Valley Civilization are not its bricks, its wells, or its baths, but its words, or rather, the fragments of a language left behind that refuses to be understood. Tiny seals, carved with strange symbols, surfaces etched with signs that repeat in patterns, yet reveal no meaning. Imagine holding one of those seals in your hand, a small square of steatite, smoothed by the touch of fingers thousands of years ago, pressed with the image of an animal perhaps, a bull with horns curved like crescents, perhaps an elephant, a mythical beast beneath which sits a line of characters, sharp and deliberate, like the stroke of a pen in a language lost to time. Scholars have studied these inscriptions for over a century, trying to unlock the code. They have compared the signs to Sumerian, to Egyptian hieroglyphs, to early Dravidian tongues. Some argue it was a written language, a full system of communication, used in trade, governance, and ritual. Others believe it was not writing at all, but only symbols, tokens of identity, marks of ownership, sacred signs tied to belief. The mystery deepens when you realize that no long texts have been found, no scrolls, no stone tablets filled with sentences, no monuments carved with stories like those of Mesopotamia or Egypt, only short lines, sometimes just 5 or 6 symbols, repeating across seals, pottery, and tablets. If this was their script, where are their histories? Where are the laws, the epics, the songs of their kings? Did they vanish, destroyed by fire or flood, or were they never written at all, preserved, only in memory and spoken word? Sit back and let that thought sink in. A civilization so advanced, yet silent in its own voice. The script taunts us, like a locked door in the middle of a crumbling city. Every theory opens it only halfway. Some believe the script holds the answer to the civilization's collapse, perhaps records of famine, of migration, of war, but until it is read, we can only guess. The signs remain there, etched in stone, defying time, defying translation, whispering across millennia. And perhaps that is the greatest irony, that one of the most sophisticated cultures of the ancient world left behind words no one can ever read. Doesn't it make you wonder what truths are buried inside symbols we stare at but cannot understand? If the Indus Valley Civilization was the heart, then its rivers were the lifeblood. The Indus itself, vast and unyielding, and its sister, the Saraswati, now little more than a ghost flowing beneath desert sands, were the reason life flourished here. But rivers are fickle, and when they change, entire worlds collapse. Imagine standing by the banks of the Saraswati thousands of years ago. The water is wide, shimmering in the sunlight, carrying silt that nourishes the soil. Farmers plant wheat and barley in its fertile floodplains. Traders sail boats across its currents. Children laugh in its shallows. The river is not simply water, it is existence itself. And yet, slowly, silently, it began to die. Climate shifts, tectonic movements, or both, no one can say with certainty, but what is known is that the river dwindled. It shrank, fractured, and finally disappeared into the desert we now call the Tar. As the river died, the cities that clung to its banks began to fade. Crops failed, wells dried, and the trade routes that had once pulsed with life grew quiet. Sit back and picture a city like Kalibangan or Banawali, once alive with movement, now baking in relentless heat. Its people looking to the horizon for a river that would never return. Some scholars suggest that the collapse of this great civilization was not sudden at all, but slower, long unraveling tied to the vanishing of water. Perhaps families left their homes not in panic, but in resignation, moving eastward, searching for new lands, carrying with them memories of a world they could never recreate. The river's disappearance was not just environmental, it was existential. To lose the Saraswati was to lose the thread that tied them together, the geography that made them a civilization. Even today, satellite images reveal the ghost of that river, a dark, dry channel beneath the sand, stretching across Rajasthan like a scar of what was lost, and perhaps of why the Indus Valley fell. And here's the lingering question. Was the river's death an accident of nature, or was it something greater, a cycle, a pattern, reminding us that even the mightiest civilizations can wither when their waters turn to dust? When we imagine the fall of civilizations, we often think of war-invading armies, fire, destruction. But sometimes the greatest enemy is the sky itself. For the people of the Indus Valley, it wasn't a clash of swords that spelled their downfall, but the slow silence of clouds that refused to break. Climate studies suggest that around 1900 BCE, the monsoons weakened. The rains, once predictable and nourishing, began to falter. Sit back for a moment and imagine the farmers of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa standing in their fields, staring at cracked soil where rivers once overflowed. The canals that carried water into the heart of their cities dried into hollow trenches. The once slush plains turned brittle and barren. Year after year, the skies remained stubborn, the rhythm of the seasons broken, until the land itself seemed to abandon them. Without rain, their crops felled barley, wheat, lentils, and cotton. All withered in the fields. Food scarcity gnawed at them slowly, not as a single disaster, but as an endless waiting, a slow attrition that drained the vitality of a civilization built on abundance. Archaeologists have found evidence of abandoned granaries, of cities gradually depopulated, not in violence, but in exhaustion. Some researchers suggest families began to scatter, leaving behind the organized city life for smaller villages, adapting as best they could to a changing world. Others argue that famine crept into their daily lives, forcing hard choices about survival. And yet, there's something almost more haunting about this version of collapse than war or invasion. There is no single day you can point to, no decisive battle where the lights went out. Instead, picture the long dusk of a civilization, year a little harder than the last, each harvest a little smaller, each street a little emptier. Their great cities didn't burn, they starved. And as the rains withdrew, so did the people. Some may have walked east toward the Ganges, searching for lands still blessed by monsoons, while others faded into history. Their descendants absorbed into cultures that would rise in their place. And this leaves us with a haunting thought. What is more tragic, a civilization destroyed in an instant, or one that dies slowly, while its people watch the skies, waiting for rain that will never come? Civilizations rise beside rivers, but those same rivers can also erase them. The Indus Valley people built their world upon the steady pulse of the Indus and its tributaries, shaping their agriculture, their trade, and even their daily rhythms around its flow. But rivers are alive, restless, unpredictable, always searching for new paths. Geological studies suggest that one of the great rivers of the Indus system, the Gagahakra, may have dried up or shifted course around the same period that the cities began to fall silent. Imagine standing in a city like Kalibangan, once fed by this mighty stream, and watching as the water receded further each season, until its bed was nothing but sand and dust. Without rivers, the fields became brittle, the animals thin, the people restless. Trade routes that had once moved along these waterways fell into disuse, like veins cut off from the heart. Some researchers believe tectonic shifts may have altered the course of entire rivers, diverting them away from the centers of civilization. Others suggest a slow process of silt and climate that choked the waters until they simply disappeared. Whatever the cause, the effect was devastating. The Indus people had engineered their lives around the promise of water, and when that promise broke, so did the foundation of their world. It's worth pausing here and picturing it not a sudden disaster, but a creeping emptiness. Streets once bustling with merchants, now coated with fine dust. Wells running shallower and shallower until nothing but echoes remained at the bottom. Children following their parents into fields where green shoots no longer appeared. A city built to harness the power of water undone by its absence. And what's most haunting is that the ruins we see today's those great brick streets. Those enormous reservoirs are monuments to water management in a world where water had fled. These empty structures feel almost like hollow prayers, echoes of a people pleading with rivers that no longer answered. And so, as the waters shifted, so too did the people. They may have followed the rivers eastward, into lands where the Ganges offered a new lifeline, carrying fragments of their knowledge with them. But as they moved, their once unified civilization scattered, dissolving into smaller, quieter communities. And it leaves us wondering, how fragile is any world built on the course of a river, when one sudden shift in nature can erase centuries of brilliance in silence? If you walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro today, you may notice something unsettling. The streets are there perfectly laid out, wide enough for carts, bordered by houses that still stand in ghostly outline, but there are no footprints, no signs of struggle, no clear evidence of how life ended here. Archaeologists uncovered homes abandoned with everyday objects left behind, as if people simply walked away and never returned. Pots still stood in kitchens, beads lay scattered where they were once strung, toys carved for children were found in the dust. It feels less like a city destroyed in violence, and more like a city frozen mid-breath, as though time itself had decided to stop. What could cause an entire population to vanish without leaving behind the marks of conquest or fire? Some suggest disease crept silently through the streets, striking swiftly and invisibly. A plague, carried perhaps by stagnant water or insects thriving in changing climate, could have emptied homes within days. Yet there are no mass graves to confirm such a tragedy. Others wonder if famine stalked the city, if failed harvests drove families to abandon their stone and brick shelters for any place where survival might be easier. Still others see the signs of gradual decline, fewer repairs on streets, weaker construction in later phases, evidence of a slow unraveling, not a sudden fall. And yet, one can't help but feel the eerie silence in those streets. Imagine standing at dusk, shadows stretching long against the walls, hearing only the whistle of wind through crumbling bricks. No laughter, no animals, no voices, only emptiness, where tens of thousands once lived. It's a silence that speaks louder than any inscription. A reminder that cities are alive only as long as people breathe life into them. When that life is gone, even the strongest bricks become hollow shells. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro are not just ruins, they are a riddle. They whisper of lives cut short, of routines disrupted, of a world that seemed secure until it wasn't. And as you trace the lines of those deserted avenues, the question presses in. Was this silence born of sudden catastrophe? Or was it the slow hush of a civilization fading into the desert winds, step by step, until only echoes remained? Among the most haunting puzzles of the Indus Valley is not its bricks or its streets, but the voices of its people carved into tiny seals, scratched onto pottery, etched into tools. The Indus script, a collection of symbols and signs, numbering in the hundreds, appears everywhere across the ruins, but no one alive today can read it. Sit with that thought for a moment, an entire civilization speaking to us across 5,000 years. And yet every word remains locked away, sealed by time. The seals themselves are small, often made of biotite, polished and inscribed with animals, symbols, and what appear to be short lines of text. Some scholars believe these were used in trade, perhaps stamped onto goods as markers of ownership or origin. Others see them as administrative or even ritualistic prayers, dedications, invocations to gods we will never know by name. What makes the mystery sharper is the brevity of the script. Most inscriptions are no more than a few characters. Long, too short to reveal a language's structure, too cryptic to unlock its grammar. Attempts to link it to Sanskrit, Dravidian languages, or even non-linguistic symbols have all failed to gain consensus. It is as though the Indus people left us a message written in code, and then ensured no one had the key to break it. Imagine holding one of these seals in your hand, feeling its cool surface, its carved lines still sharp after thousands of years. You know someone, somewhere, pressed these symbols with meaning, believing they would endure, believing their words would carry forward into the future. And yet here we are, staring at silence, masquerading as script. Perhaps the greatest frustration is knowing that if we could read even one sentence, a single clear statement, entire histories might unfold before us, the names of kings or commoners, the myths they told, the laws they lived by, the reasons they vanished. But the script resists, holding tightly to its secrets. And so, in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, we find ourselves surrounded by symbols that taunt us. They remind us that knowledge, once lost, is not easily regained. The Indus Valley's voice is there, preserved in stone, and yet we remain deaf to it. This silence is not accidental, it feels deliberate, as though the civilization itself chose to fade away without explanation, leaving behind only puzzles that cannot be solved. And in that silence, the mystery deepens. What truths did they take with them into the dust? When we walk through the silent ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, it's easy to imagine a city alive with sound, the murmur of traders in crowded marketplaces, the laughter of children splashing water in courtyards, the shuffle of feet along smooth brick streets. But at some unknown moment, those sounds faded. The streets emptied, the doors closed, and the cities of the Indus Valley began to crumble into quiet. What makes their disappearance so strange is not only that it happened, but how little evidence there is to explain it. Unlike other ancient collapses, there are no grand battles etched into stone, no records of invasion carved by conquerors, no fires that charred entire districts into ash. Instead, we find an unsettling absence, a slow unraveling that seems to have left more questions than answers. Some archaeologists suggest the Great River, the lifeblood of the civilization, shifted its course, turning fertile lands into dry wastelands and forcing people to scatter in search of water. Others propose that climate change brought long droughts or monsoon failures, stripping the region of the agricultural stability it once enjoyed. And yet, the evidence is scattered, fragmented like pieces of a puzzle where half the image is missing. When you look at the layers of the ruins, you see something almost eerie, signs that people continued to live there even as the cities decayed. Walls were repaired with less care, streets grew uneven, and buildings once grand were divided into cramped quarters. It's as though the cities themselves were unraveling, not in a single dramatic event, but in a gradual retreat, like a flame, dying not from wind but from lack of oxygen. And still, we cannot say for certain why. Did famine tighten its grip, forcing families to leave behind homes they had known for generations? Did disease spread silently through the population, thinning numbers until whole districts fell into ruin? Or was it something else entirely, some catastrophe or upheaval so profound it erased not only the cities but also the memory of what happened? Today, the ruins remain as echoes of that vanishing act. Standing among the sun-baked bricks, you can feel the weight of the question pressing in. How does a civilization so vast, so advanced, simply dissolve into silence? The Indus Valley's disappearance was not loud. It was quiet, unsettlingly quiet. And in that quiet lies a truth we cannot yet touch, that even the mightiest of cities can vanish not with a crash, but with a whisper. Among all the puzzles left behind by the Indus Valley Civilization, none is more haunting than their script. Carved into seals, etched onto pottery, and pressed into tiny fragments of stone, the symbols stare back at us across thousands of years, lines, loops, and abstract forms that seem to belong to a language no one can hear. Sit with one of these seals in your hand, and you feel as if you're holding a locked door to a vanished world. The people of the Indus Valley wrote, we know that much, but what they said, what they recorded, what they wanted to preserve, it remains sealed in silence. Scholars have tried for more than a century to unlock the code. Some argue that it represents a full written language, perhaps one of the earliest forms of Dravidian, the linguistic ancestor of languages still spoken in South India today. Others suggest it may not be a language at all, but rather a set of symbols representing families, clans, or trades. A few even believe it might be something in between, a mixture of ritual marks and shorthand inscriptions, more symbolic than literal. Yet despite endless attempts, the meaning refuses to surface. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, we have no Rosetta Stone to guide us, no bilingual text to compare, no key to the code. Every attempt feels like fumbling in the dark, catching glimpses of shapes but never the full picture. This absence is more than frustrating, it is devastating. Because without their words, we cannot hear their voices. We cannot know what they called themselves, what gods they worshipped, what laws they lived by, or what fears they carried as their cities declined. We cannot read their prayers, their contracts, their stories, their songs. We are left only with silence written in stone. And yet, perhaps that silence is part of the allure. The unbroken mystery draws us deeper into the ruins, inviting us to imagine what truths lie just beyond our grasp. Were the seals talismans carried for protection or trade? Did the inscriptions mark ownership, or were they part of rituals meant to bind the living to the unseen world? Each possibility lingers, never confirmed, never denied. And so the script remains a ghost of language, a voice without sound, a story without words, until the day someone breaks the code. The people of the Indus Valley remain hidden behind their own unspoken curtain, a civilization that spoke but left no echoes. Amidst the crumbling bricks of Mohenjo-Daro lies one of the most striking features of the Indus Valley Civilization, the Great Bath. At first glance, it is nothing more than a massive sunken tank, its floor carefully sealed with layers of bitumen, its sides lined with baked bricks that still hold their shape after nearly 5 millennia. But when you stand before it, when you trace the symmetry of its design, you realize this was no ordinary pool. It whispers of ritual, of cleansing, of ceremonies that bound community and belief together. Archaeologists believe the Great Bath was a sacred space, perhaps the center of life for the city. Imagine the scene, the soft sound of water pouring in, filling the tank from nearby wells, the faint shimmer of the surface reflecting torchlight in the evening. People stepping into the water with slow reverence, their movements deliberate, their minds heavy with prayer or tradition. This was not play, nor simple hygiene, it was ritual. To bathe here may have meant washing away more than dust and sweat. It may have been a passage between states of being, a doorway into renewal. The design itself hints at importance. Stairways on either end descend gracefully into the pool, as if inviting processions. A surrounding colonnade of rooms may have served as preparation chambers, places where participants changed or prayed before entering the water. Even the careful waterproofing suggests permanence, as if the builders intended for this sacred pool to endure for generations. Some researchers argue it could have been linked to fertility rituals, tied to the life-giving force of water in a land where rivers dictated survival. Others suggest it may have symbolized purity, a communal rite of cleansing that united the people under shared belief. Yet the mystery deepens because no temples, no idols, no written prayers surround it. Unlike other ancient civilizations, the Indus left behind no clear evidence of gods or centralized worship. This absence forces us to wonder, was the Great Bath tied to an organized religion, or was it something older, more primal, communal ritual born from the rhythms of river and rain? Today, the pool lies dry, its steps worn smooth by time, its silence broken only by the wind. And still, it asks us the same question. What did they seek in those waters? What fears or hopes did they carry into its depths? And what unseen power did they believe would rise to meet them there? Scattered across seals, tablets, pottery, and tools are the characters of a language that has never been read. The indescript short clusters of symbols carved with precision stands as one of history's most stubborn riddles. Each mark feels deliberate, arranged with rhythm and purpose, and yet no key has ever been found to unlock their meaning. Imagine small square seals pressed into soft clay, leaving behind symbols of animals, plants, geometric shapes, and abstract forms, some no larger than a fingernail. Traders carried them, stamped goods with them, exchanged them across lands stretching from Mesopotamia to the Arabian Sea. But what did these markings say? Were they names of merchants, declarations of ownership, prayers to unseen gods, or records of trade? The mystery deepens with every fragment unearthed. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, the Indus script left no long inscriptions, no grand declarations etched into stone walls. Instead, it lingers in whispers, compact and maddeningly brief. The longest inscription discovered holds fewer than 30 signs. It is as if the civilization spoke in coded breaths, never offering enough to reveal the full message. Scholars have tried for decades to break its silence. Some believe it represents a fully developed language, lost to time. Others suggest it may not be language at all, but a set of symbols conveying identity or status without grammar or speech. There are theories linking it to early Dravidian languages, to Proto-Munda tongues, even to an isolated system all its own, extinct without leaving heirs. Computers have been trained to analyze patterns, searching for structure, rhythm, repetition. And still, the script refuses to yield. It sits quietly, like the civilization itself, keeping its truths locked behind walls no one can penetrate. Think of it, an entire world of thought, of memory, of instruction and belief, sealed in silence, waiting for a voice that may never come. Without the script, their stories remain half-formed. We can see their cities, touch their pottery, admire their jewelry, even walk through their streets. But their thoughts, Their prayers, their myths all, are sealed away in lines and curves that stand just beyond reach. And perhaps that is the cruelest mystery of all, that a civilization so advanced, so carefully built, might remain forever voiceless, speaking only in symbols that echo like shadows of words we cannot hear. So we are left to wonder what wisdom lies hidden in those forgotten marks, and why has time conspired to keep them silent? When we search for answers to the Indus Valley's disappearance, one theory rises again and again like a mirage in the desert. The land itself betrayed its people. The rivers that once fed the civilization, the Indus, the Saraswati, and countless smaller tributaries may have changed their course or run dry under the weight of shifting climates. Imagine, for a moment, the roar of a mighty river shrinking to a whisper, its fertile banks cracking in the sun, the lifeblood of millions evaporating into dust. Some researchers believe the Saraswati, once described in ancient texts as vast and powerful, dried out around the time the Indus Valley began to wane. Without water, agriculture faltered. Fields that had once yielded wheat, barley, and sesame turned brittle. Harvests shrank. Hunger crept in slowly at first, then more insistently, until survival itself became a daily negotiation. Archaeological evidence shows patterns of abandonment. Cities that had thrived for centuries were suddenly left behind, their walls still standing, but their streets eerily empty. No grand battles or fires mark the undonly silence and dust. But others argue it was not a single river's death, but a broader climate shift. A centuries-long drought that swept across South Asia around 2000 BCE. Tree ring studies, sediment analysis, and ancient climate records suggest monsoons weakened during this time. What had once been predictable rains became unreliable, and the delicate balance that allowed the Indus cities to flourish collapsed. Picture a people waiting for rain that never comes, storing water in great jars, rationing each drop, watching their reservoirs sink lower with every passing season. The canals they once engineered with precision may have turned into channels of cracked earth, mocking their brilliance. And still, the drought theory leaves questions. If water disappeared, why did some regions of the Indus Valley continue in reduced form while others were abandoned entirely? Did migration scatter them, pushing survivors eastward toward the Ganges basin? Or did smaller communities adapt, reshaping their way of life while the great urban centers crumbled? The drought did not just take crops, it took certainty. For a civilization that built itself on the steady rhythm of rivers, the loss of water was more than material, it was existential. When rivers betray, gods feel silent, and the very foundation of order seems to vanish. And so, the drought theory remains haunting, not a tale of sudden destruction, but of slow suffocation, where a once mighty civilization withered like leaves in the absence of rain. The lingering question is simple but devastating: what happens to a world when the sky itself forgets to weep? If drought offers one explanation, another whispers from the ground itself. Some scientists suggest that the Indus Valley Civilization may have been undone not just by the skies above, but by the earth beneath. The region sits in a zone where tectonic activity has always been a quiet but powerful force. Rivers, after all, do not vanish by chance. They are redirected, broken, sometimes swallowed by the shifting of land. Imagine standing in Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro and feeling the earth tremble, walls shuddering, the great brick streets vibrating underfoot. For the people who lived then, such tremors may have felt like the wrath of unseen forces. Geological studies indicate that around the time of the Indus decline, riverbeds were disrupted in ways that suggest seismic activity. The mighty whose waters once stretched broad and deep may have been lost not only to drought but to shifts in the very crust of the earth. An earthquake could have diverted its flow underground or redirected it entirely, leaving cities that depended on it suddenly stranded in an arid wasteland. Archaeological layers show evidence of rebuilding in certain areas, walls reconstructed, foundations reset as if people were trying to adapt to repeated damage. But how many times can a city rise again after the ground refuses stability? Single massive quake might topple structures, but a series of smaller, relentless tremors could erode the very spirit of a people. And consider the psychological toll. To live in constant fear that the earth might heave and crack, that rivers might abandon their courses overnight, would erode not only crops and homes, but trust in the natural order itself. Yet, as always, the mystery deepens. Earthquakes may have been part of the story, but they cannot alone explain why a civilization of such vast scale, spread across hundreds of miles, faded almost uniformly. Some cities survived longer, others less, suggesting that tectonic shifts may have been one thread in a larger web of decline. Still, the theory lingers like an echo. Perhaps the Indus Valley did not fall only to the sky's silence or to foreign invasion, but to the ground shifting under its feet, a slow betrayal of the very earth they built upon. And this leaves us with another haunting thought. What happens to a people when their greatest stability, the ground itself, becomes the source of their undoing? When we look at the collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization, one shadow lingers in nearly every theory: the possibility of outside migration. Some scholars argue that the decline of the Indus was not solely due to rivers drying or earthquakes shaking, but also because of the gradual arrival of new groups into the region. These were not necessarily invaders with swords and shields crashing through city gates, but rather waves of pastoralists, herding animals, moving with the seasons, and slowly settling into territories once held by the great urban centers. Picture it, Mohenjo-Daro, still standing with its brick streets and watchful wells. But beyond its walls, herders leading cattle, building small camps, and slowly establishing villages where once there was only farmland. Over time, these outsiders may have brought with them new languages, new customs, and new religious practices. Some researchers link this migration to the early Indo-Aryans, whose Vedic culture would later rise to prominence in northern India. Whether they arrived peacefully, intermarried, or clashed with the existing populations remains a subject of endless debate. But what is certain is that the archaeological record shows change pottery styles shifting, burial practices evolving, symbols and scripts of the Indus fading into obscurity. For a civilization built on shared systems, uniform bricks, and widespread trade, this kind of cultural blending could feel like the slow unraveling of identity. Imagine being an Indus craftsman whose city no longer commands the same authority, watching as outsiders bring their own traditions and slowly reshape the land that once thrived on order and balance. And yet, we must be cautious here. There is little evidence of massive battles or sudden destruction in the Indus cities. Most appear abandoned rather than conquered. That silence is telling. Perhaps the people themselves chose to leave, unable to sustain their urban lives, and when outsiders arrived, they simply filled the vacuum, blending with the remnants of a once great culture. It is a story less of conquest and more of quiet replacement. but that in itself carries a haunting weight. A civilization so vast and advanced does not need to fall with fire and blood. It can fade in the silence of migration, the quiet arrival of new peoples, until the memory of what once was becomes a ghost lingering beneath the soil. And the question remains, did the Indus collapse because of these newcomers, or did the newcomers thrive because the Indus was already falling apart? Among the most haunting mysteries of the Indus Valley Civilization is its undeciphered script, a language carved into tiny seals and etched into pottery, whispering across millennia, yet never speaking clearly to us. When we look at the collapse of this civilization, the silence of this script feels almost symbolic, a great voice fading away just as its cities emptied. Hundreds of symbols appear across the archaeological record, from inscriptions barely longer than a word to sequences that seem almost like sentences. Yet, no Rosetta Stone has ever been found to unlock their meaning. Scholars have argued endlessly. Was it a full written language, or merely a system of signs used for trade and ritual? Some suggest it encoded names of merchants, gods, or cities, while others believe it represented an entire grammar now lost. Whatever the truth, one fact chills the imagination. After the fall of the Indus, the script simply vanishes. There is no continuity, no gradual evolution into later Indian writing systems. It stops, abruptly, like a candle snuffed out in the wind. Imagine standing in Mohenjo-Daro during its decline, holding a clay seal stamped with one of these symbols. Perhaps it represented your name, or your family's lineage, or a god you prayed to each morning. Yet, as your city emptied, as the wells dried and the trade routes shifted, no one carried that symbol forward. Within a few generations, its meaning would be lost forever, and what was once living language became silent relics buried in the dust. This fading of a script is more than a loss of words. It is the loss of memory itself. For civilizations, writing is survival proof that ideas outlive lifetimes. And yet here, an entire world of thought vanished because the key to understanding it was not preserved. Some researchers argue that this silence was tied to the decline itself, as the cities fractured. As central authority collapsed, there was no longer a need for a shared system of writing. Others suggest a darker possibility, that the people themselves abandoned the script, adopting the languages and traditions of new groups who moved into the region, leaving their own identity behind. Whatever the cause, the effect remains chilling. The Indus Valley Civilization was one of the largest in the ancient world, and yet today we cannot read a single sentence from its people. Their laws, their prayers, their poems all gone, and so the mystery lingers. Was the script's silence the symptom of collapse, or the cause? When we move deeper into the mystery of the Indus Valley Civilization's collapse, one of the most unsettling sights is the vastness of its abandoned cities. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholafira, Rakagari, names that once echoed with life, commerce, and ritual now sit silent beneath layers of dust and time. Archaeologists uncover streets that once teemed with activity, drains that carried away the sounds of everyday living, and walls that enclosed homes filled with families, laughter, and routines. Yet now they lie still, as if frozen in time, entire neighborhoods deserted without clear evidence of sudden destruction. Unlike the ruins of other civilizations, where conquest or fire left obvious scars, the Indus cities seem to have been abandoned gradually, like a flame dying slowly rather than being abruptly extinguished. Some researchers argue that climate shifts or the drying of the Saraswati River pushed people away, forcing mass migration. Others suggest a subtler unraveling, trade networks collapsing, resources dwindling, leadership weakening, until the people themselves chose to scatter in search of survival. The eeriest part is the absence of monuments to explain the story. There are no grand inscriptions declaring a ruler's fall, no epic texts mourning a lost kingdom, no temple walls describing the anger of the gods. Instead, there is only emptiness, as if the civilization dissolved into the earth without leaving behind its voice. Walking through the excavated streets today, you might imagine the echoes of sandals slapping against baked bricks, merchants calling out prices in busy marketplaces, children darting through alleys, and families gathering round hearths at dusk. But those echoes are faint illusions, ghosts stirred by the imagination. Because the reality is that no one knows why they left. Were these people refugees of a natural disaster, or participants in a slow, collective retreat? Did they scatter into the countryside, blending with smaller villages, leaving behind the grandeur of their urban experiment? The sheer scale of abandonment is staggering. Tens of thousands of people simply gone, their homes left intact but hollow, their cities surrendered to silence. From above, the ruins look like a map of loss, grids of order with no heartbeat to sustain them. And the deeper question rises: if such advanced cities could crumble into silence so quietly, what does that mean for our own world of skyscrapers and highways? The ghost cities along the river serve as a reminder that complexity does not guarantee permanence, and that even the strongest structures can vanish when the lifeblood that sustains them, the people, choose to walk away. Among the most haunting theories about the collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization is tied to water, the very element that gave the civilization its life may also have been what sealed its fate. The Saraswati River, spoken of in ancient texts, once flowed strong and wide across the plains, nourishing fertile lands and feeding countless villages and towns. Alongside it, the Indus itself carried silt and water that allowed agriculture to thrive, making the region one of the most prosperous in the ancient world. Yet at some point, the rivers changed. Geological studies suggest massive tectonic shifts may have altered the course of the Saraswati, causing it to dry up, while the Indus itself began flooding in irregular cycles, either drowning fields or leaving them parched. Imagine the despair of farmers watching their once reliable fields turn into dust-blown wastelands, their crops withering before harvest. Picture families forced to leave behind homes where generations had lived, driven by thirst and hunger, moving toward uncertain lands in search of water. Some researchers believe prolonged droughts stretched over centuries, pushing the urban centers past their breaking point. The drying rivers may have destroyed the agricultural backbone, leading not just to famine but to the unraveling of the trade systems that relied on surplus crops. Suddenly, the bustling cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro would have found themselves without the very foundation of their prosperity. What makes this theory especially chilling is how invisible such a collapse would have felt to the people at the time. There would have been no single moment of catastrophe, no army breaching the gates or fire sweeping through the streets, but rather a slow suffocation of their way of life. Every year, less water, fewer crops, more tension. It is a scenario of quiet desperation, communities abandoning their beloved cities, not because they wanted to, but because the rivers no longer sustained them. Even today, satellite imagery reveals traces of the Saraswati's ancient bed, ghostly lines across the desert that hint at the mighty river that once gave life and then withdrew it. Standing in those barren stretches, it is difficult not to feel the echo of that loss, as if the earth itself keeps the memory of a vanished lifeline. And so the question remains, did the disappearance of their rivers take with it the heart of the civilization, leaving only dry bricks and hollow cities behind? As we move deeper into the silence of this lost civilization, another unsettling theory rises from beneath our feet: earthquakes. The Indus Valley sat upon a region where tectonic plates constantly nudged, shifted, and pressed against each other, invisible forces building pressure for centuries. Archaeologists, studying layers of soil and ruins, have found evidence of sudden disruptions. Entire neighborhoods tilted or buried in ways that suggest the earth did not rest quietly. Imagine a thriving city, its streets alive with merchants and children, when without warning the ground groans and splits, toppling mud brick walls, cracking granaries, shattering wells. For a moment, all order dissolves into chaos, and the city that once felt eternal suddenly becomes fragile, exposed to powers far beyond human control. Unlike floods or droughts, an earthquake leaves scars that can change rivers, redirecting their flow, draining wells, and even swallowing entire water channels. Some researchers suggest that a series of violent quakes may permanently alter the flow of the Indus and its tributaries, disrupting irrigation systems that had taken generations to perfect. This chain reaction could have crippled agriculture, sparking food shortages and forcing communities to scatter. But earthquakes are not only physical disasters, they carry psychological weight. For a society built on precise planning, symmetry, and order, the shattering of that order by the trembling earth may have felt like the unraveling of the world itself. Religious or cultural responses could have further deepened the crisis, as people tried to interpret what the earth's anger meant, perhaps seeing it as divine punishment or a warning to leave. Layer by layer, archaeologists have uncovered signs that parts of settlements were abandoned abruptly, as if people simply gave up on rebuilding after the land beneath them shifted too many times. The weight of starting over, again and again, may have been too much. Yet the evidence is not absolute. Some walls lean, but others stand. And the silence of history leaves us to wonder whether these quakes were the final blow, or only one piece of a larger puzzle. Still, the thought lingers. What if it was not invading armies, not slow starvation, but the very earth itself that rose against the Indus people, shaking them loose from their cities and scattering them into history's shadows? If the earth beneath the Indus people may have betrayed them, perhaps the sky above delivered its own silent message. Some researchers propose that shifts in the atmosphere, long cycles of climate that stretch beyond a single generation, may have reshaped the destiny of this great civilization. Imagine centuries of steady monsoons, rains arriving like clockwork, filling reservoirs, flooding fields with fertile silt, and guaranteeing the survival of millions. Then something changes. Perhaps the rains grew weak, arriving late or not at all. Perhaps clouds passed over but gave little, leaving cracked riverbeds where life once flourished. At first, the people of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro would have adapted. Clever engineers redirecting the dwindling waters, storing them in vast tanks, digging wells deeper into the earth. But as the decades wore on, the balance tipped further. Crops would wither in the fields, cattle would grow thin, and hunger would gnaw at the edges of society. Food shortages may have sparked internal conflicts, neighbors turning against neighbors as survival itself became uncertain. And yet, the climate story is not only about absence. Some evidence points to the opposite, that floods, not droughts, may have delivered devastation, a sky opening with relentless storms, pouring rivers of water across carefully planned streets, drowning fields, collapsing homes. Either extreme too little or too much wood have unraveled a society so dependent on seasonal balance. The Indus Valley thrived on predictability, on systems that assumed the world would remain steady. When that steadiness fractured, the foundation of life itself began to erode. Scholars studying ancient sediments speak of riverbeds drying while others speak of massive floods. But the truth may lie somewhere in between, in cycles of chaos that no one could fully control. To the people living through it, the heavens may have seemed capricious, as though the gods themselves had withdrawn their favor. And so, under skies that no longer gave what they once promised, the Indus cities may have slowly emptied. Families moving away in search of more reliable lands, scattering across regions where their legacy would blur into other cultures. Yet, the question hangs unresolved. Did the rains truly vanish, or did they arrive in such fury that they broke the very systems built to withstand them? The whispers of the sky remain uncertain, leaving us with an image of a civilization looking upward, waiting for rain or fearing its return, caught in a dialogue with forces far beyond their reach. Picture the streets of Mohenjo-Daro at the height of its power, the air alive with the sounds of merchants calling out their wares, carts rattling along stone-paved roads, and children laughing as they splashed in water channels that threaded through the city. Now, imagine those same streets years later, empty, wind echoing through crumbling walls, doors left ajar with no one to close them. The silence so deep that even the stray dogs might hesitate to enter. Archaeologists, uncovering these cities, describe a haunting absence: tools left behind, half-finished pots abandoned in kilns, grain stored in silos, never reclaimed. This is not the mark of sudden catastrophe alone, but of gradual decline, a slow unraveling that allowed people time to leave, yet left behind the ghost of everything they built. Abandonment on such a scale speaks of lives uprooted, of decisions made with heavy hearts as families walked away from the only homes they had ever known. We can almost see them, men loading carts with whatever could be carried, women gathering children, elders walking slowly behind as the city that had nurtured them fell away in the distance. Did they look back one last time at the great baths, the wells, the warehouses filled with grain? Or did they leave without daring to glance behind, as though turning back would freeze them in a place no longer capable of sustaining life? The silence of abandonment is powerful because it lingers even today. Walking through the excavated ruins, one feels not just the absence of people, but the presence of something unfinished. As though the civilization paused rather than ended. Their carefully laid streets and perfectly aligned bricks whisper of a people who once believed in permanence, only to discover that permanence was an illusion. Some suggest that these cities were not entirely abandoned but transformed, their people dispersing into smaller villages, adapting to new ways of life. Others believe the abandonment marked a more decisive end, an irreversible fading into history's shadows. The silence does not confirm one theory over another, but it weighs on us like a story half told. What remains undeniable is the eerie impression that these places were not destroyed in rage or fire, but left behind by choice or necessity, leaving behind shells of greatness. And as we walk through their silent streets today, the question grows louder in the quiet. What would drive a people to leave behind so much, and where did they go? The Indus was once the heartbeat of this civilization, its waters feeding the fields, its channels guiding trade, its very presence shaping the rhythms of life. But rivers are both givers and takers, and when they shift, the world around them changes forever. Geological studies suggest that the mighty Saraswati, a river celebrated in ancient texts, may have dried or shifted course during this time, leaving once thriving lands barren and cracked. Imagine farmers standing at the edge of parched fields, waiting for rains that no longer came, staring at canals where water once shimmered, now reduced to dusty scars across the land. Grain stores emptied, crops failed, and hunger spread like a slow-moving storm. The betrayal of the river was not sudden, but relentless. Year after year. The flow diminished, the fertile soil hardened, and the promise of abundance gave way to despair. For a civilization so dependent on water, this was no small blow. Entire cities, built on predictable river cycles, found themselves at the mercy of nature's whims. Some suggest floods compounded the crisis, monsoon rains, swelling the river beyond control, drowning streets and washing away homes. In one era, there may have been too little water. In another, too much. The balance that sustained life was broken, and the people of the Indus found themselves caught between extremes. Archaeologists, studying soil layers, see the story written. In earth itself, silt deposits where floods once surged, and dry layers where drought took hold. The river, once a steady ally, became unpredictable, reminding all who lived along its banks that nature could not be commanded. Picture families debating their fate under the stars. Should they wait for the river to return, or should they abandon the cities built on its promise? The river's betrayal was not personal, but it felt that way. Generations who had worshipped its waters and depended on its generosity must have felt the sting of betrayal as the very force that gave them life began to withdraw. It was a reminder of the fragility of human achievement, that even the grandest cities could be reduced to dust when the river turned away. And yet, as haunting as this image is, it raises another question. Was it only the river's betrayal that broke the Indus? Or was it merely the beginning of a larger cascade that no one could stop? When survival grows uncertain, people move. It is one of the oldest patterns in human history. When the land no longer yields, when rivers fail, when famine creeps into every home, families gather what little they can carry and set out in search of new beginnings. In the Indus Valley, evidence points to such migrations. The once dense urban centers began to empty, their grand avenues left eerily quiet. Small rural settlements, scattered along the edges of the civilization's former heartland, began to swell. Archaeologists uncover modest villages that rose as cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa fell silent, suggesting that people may have abandoned the grandeur of urban life for the simpler survival of farming communities. Imagine the scene, long lines of people leaving behind the baked brick homes they had known for generations, carrying bundles of grain, herding goats and cattle, walking into the unknown with nothing but the hope of water and fertile soil ahead. Some may have moved east toward the Ganges plain, where rains were more reliable. Others may have drifted west or south, seeking safer ground away from rivers that had betrayed them. It was not an exodus in a single moment, but a slow unraveling. Family by family, year by year, until the cities no longer echoed with life. The whispers of migration linger in the ruins, in the absence of mass graves, in the lack of violent destruction, in the sense that people did not perish in place, but dispersed outward, dissolving into the vast landscape of South Asia. For the descendants of the Indus, this migration was both an ending and a beginning. Their culture did not vanish in an instant. It diffused, spread, and merged with others, leaving behind traces that still echo in traditions, languages, and rituals today. Yet the mystery remains. Did they leave willingly, seeking greener lands, or were they forced, their hand pushed? By hunger, by drought, by rivers that had turned cruel. Each abandoned street, each silent granary, each toppled wall speaks less of sudden catastrophe and more of a quiet departure. And that silence is haunting, because within it lies the unanswered question. When they walked away from their cities, did they believe they would ever return, or did they know the Indus world was ending forever? Civilizations are not only measured in their monuments or their cities, but also in the knowledge they carry, their skills, their systems, their stories. When the Indus Valley began to fade, so too did the threads of wisdom that had bound it together. The carefully planned streets, the standardized weights, the mastery of drainage all slowly unraveled as people scattered into smaller communities. In the ruins, archaeologists find hints of decline, crude pottery replacing once finely crafted ceramics, uneven brickwork where once there had been perfect ratios, the loss of uniformity that had made the civilization remarkable. Imagine the slow erosion of expertise as master craftsmen died without apprentices, as scribes wrote in symbols no one would later remember, as builders left behind techniques that would not be revived for centuries. The script of the Indus, etched into seals and tablets, fell silent with them. Unlike Egypt with its hieroglyphs, or Mesopotamia with its cuneiform, the Indus script was never passed down in decipherable form. No Rosetta Stone has ever surfaced, no bilingual record to bridge the gap. Knowledge was not just forgotten, it became sealed in silence. Perhaps it was preserved orally, carried in stories or chants, yet without written continuity, so much was lost to time. Think of the countless innovations buried with them. Medical practices, religious philosophies, mathematical concepts that might have rivaled those of their contemporaries, all dissolved into the dust as their cities crumbled. It is a haunting thought that entire libraries of human experience could vanish, leaving us to piece together fragments from broken pots and scattered bones. And yet, this loss creates its own allure, because what is hidden draws us closer. What we cannot read forces us to wonder. The fading of Indus knowledge was not only a tragedy for its people, but a mystery for us, a silence so profound that even today we strain to catch its echoes. Their wisdom did not disappear completely, it seeped into the soil, into neighboring cultures, into the slow evolution of South Asia. But in losing their script, in losing their city knowledge, humanity lost one of its earliest voices, and we are left to ask, how much of who we are today is built on foundations we can no longer see, knowledge that once existed but slipped away in the shadows of history. As we move toward the final chapters of the Indus story, imagine the cities that once thrummed with life, now eerily quiet. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dolivera, names that evoke the grandeur of a vanished world, stood as marvels of human ingenuity. Yet by 1800 BCE, they were largely abandoned. Sit back and picture the streets, once bustling with traders and artisans, now empty except for the wind whistling through crumbling walls and the occasional call of a bird. Wells that had supplied water to tens of thousands of people now held stagnant pools, and granaries, once meticulously organized, lay in silent ruin. The monumental baths, symbols of a civilization obsessed with cleanliness and ritual, were left to the elements, their brickwork gradually softening under the relentless sun and sporadic rains. Some researchers suggest that repeated flooding may have undermined the foundations of these cities, while others point to prolonged drought and the disruption of vital irrigation systems as the culprit. And yet, no single explanation fully accounts for the sudden emptiness. From one mystery to the next, we see hints that the population didn't simply vanish, they migrated, carrying their lives with them into smaller villages, into the foothills of the Himalayas. But even there, the shift was not enough to sustain their sophisticated urban culture. What we see in the archaeological record is a civilization slowly unraveling, not with a single cataclysmic event, but in subtle, cumulative steps. Streets became overgrown, workshops silent, and the very knowledge of city management faded. Imagine the artisans, once masters of bronze and terracotta, pausing at their work, looking at skies that no longer promised reliable monsoon rains, wondering how to feed their families, protect their homes, and maintain the life they had built. There is an almost tangible melancholy in these sights, the echoes of laughter, commerce, and rituals trapped in the dust. And as we trace the final footprint of these urban giants, one question lingers: what drove a people so organized, so innovative, to abandon what they had built? Was it the shifting climate, the changing river courses, or pressures from incoming groups? Or perhaps a combination of forces too complex to fully comprehend, a convergence of nature and human circumstance that even the best minds of their time could not counter. And so, the last cities of the Indus Valley Civilization stand as silent witnesses, holding their secrets beneath layers of earth, inviting us to uncover them, yet keeping their ultimate story just out of reach. Now, as we shift our focus from deserted streets to the paths less traveled, picture the Harappan people carrying their lives eastward, moving toward the Himalayan foothills. Sit back, relax, and imagine families navigating rugged terrain, rivers swollen or dry, and forests that had long been untamed. The grandeur of city life, the baths, the granaries, the meticulously planned streets, was replaced by smaller, more fragile settlements, villages where the rhythm of life depended intimately on seasonal rains. Some researchers believe that the weakening of summer monsoons forced this migration, while others suggest that pressures from incoming Indo-Aryan groups nudged communities out of their familiar lands. As they moved, the techniques of urban living began to fragment. The precision of their weights and measures, the uniformity of their brickwork, the complexity of their irrigation systems slowly gave way to more rudimentary methods suited for a smaller population. Imagine artisans and farmers adjusting to a new environment, learning to live off what the hills and rivers could provide, cultivating crops in less predictable conditions, adapting their knowledge to survive rather than to flourish. Yet, even in these new settlements, traces of Harappan ingenuity persisted. Terracotta toys, beads, and tools continued to appear, whispers of a sophisticated past carried like echoes in the wind. Some suggest that these remnants acted as a bridge between the urban past and a rural, decentralized future, while others see them as fading signals of a civilization in retreat. As you envision these migratory routes, picture the psychological toll as well, the loss of city walls that once offered protection, the uncertainty of new neighbors, the disorientation of leaving familiar streets behind, and in the background, the rivers themselves, once lifelines of the Harappan world, shifted and changed, some drying, some overflowing, reshaping landscapes and destinies alike. From this migration, we can glimpse not just the movement of people, but the unraveling of culture and infrastructure. The slow transformation from a network of great cities to scattered villages, barely clinging to the knowledge of their ancestors. The question remains, and it lingers like a shadow over these hills. How did a people so advanced adapt to the sudden disappearance of their ordered world? And what became of the stories, the skills, and the secrets they carried with them into these new lands? The journey eastward was not merely a relocation, it was the continuation of a civilization in fragments, and the beginning of the mystery we still strive to understand. As we turn our attention from human migration to the forces beyond their control, imagine the land itself as a character in this unfolding mystery. Sit back, relax, and feel the weight of time pressing down on the Indus River Valley as the climate began to shift imperceptibly, yet inexorably. Summer monsoons, once reliable and generous, started to wane, leaving fields parched and granaries vulnerable. Some researchers believe that these climatic changes were influenced by cold Arctic air pushing southward, diverting storms and weakening the lifeblood of the region, while others argue that local tectonic shifts may have subtly altered river courses, undermining the irrigation systems painstakingly built over centuries. Picture the rivers, once steady and life-giving, now erratic and capricious, flooding some fields while leaving others dry, their rhythms no longer in harmony with planting cycles. In these conditions, the ingenuity of the Harappans, from their dams and canals to wells and channels, was tested like never before. Villagers and city dwellers alike must have faced the chilling realization that nature, long their ally, had become unpredictable, even hostile. Crops failed, trade slowed, and the centralized authority that once coordinated such marvels of engineering began to falter. Some suggest that societal structures began to fragment as communities prioritized survival over cohesion, and that disputes over dwindling resources may have sown seeds of tension long before the cities were abandoned. From the perspective of the present, we can see patterns in sediment cores and stalagmites that hint at the changing monsoon cycles. But for those living through it, the causes would have been invisible, mysterious, and terrifyingly immediate. Imagine standing on the banks of a river that no longer obeys reason, watching as the waters retreat or surge unexpectedly, and feeling the quiet rebellion of the land against the civilization built upon it. The grand streets of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa may have been silent then, but the earth itself was speaking in floods and droughts, in shifting soil and vanishing water. And in this dialogue between humans and nature, one question lingers, whispering across centuries. Was it the land's quiet rebellion, the pressures of migrating peoples, or some combination of forces that finally fractured one of the world's earliest great civilizations? The answer remains obscured, hidden in layers of soil, memory, and time. As we reach the final chapter of our journey through the Indus Valley Civilization, take a moment to sit back, relax, and let the echoes of a vanished world wash over you. Cities that once teemed with tens of thousands of people, streets lined with precise brickwork, markets bustling with trade, and the hum of artisans crafting jewelry, toys, and terracotta figurines, all of it has faded into silence. Some researchers suggest that climate shifts, dwindling monsoons, and the migration of peoples may have combined to gradually unravel the fabric of this once great civilization. Others point to the possibility of internal societal fractures or external pressures from incoming groups as the catalysts for decline. Whatever the truth, the Indus Valley leaves us with a haunting reminder of how fragile human achievement can be in the face of nature, time, and circumstance. Picture the remnants of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, today stark, silent, yet whispering their secrets through the carefully carved seals, dancing figurines, and the faint outlines of streets and drains. It is a world that invites questions as much as it offers answers. A civilization that challenges our understanding and ignites curiosity about what has been lost to time. As we step away from this ancient enigma, let the mystery linger in your mind. A reminder that some stories are meant to be pondered rather than solved, and that the past can teach us as much through its silences as through its monuments. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of history's most beguiling mysteries. If you found yourself captivated, intrigued, or simply awed by the secrets of the Indus Valley, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who love uncovering ancient mysteries, and subscribe to the channel for more journeys into the past. I'd also love to hear from you. Comment down below and let me know where you're watching from, because this story spans continents and millennia, and connecting with curious minds around the world makes the mystery feel alive. The Indus Valley may have vanished, but its whispers continue, and together we keep listening.